This is the TV Live podcast with Rob Francis.
Let's be blunt about this from the start. The 1989 ITV generic on-air look was not a triumph. It was an interesting idea, competently executed, badly judged, and fatally undermined by the network that commissioned it. What it reveals about ITV at the end of the 1980s is far more interesting than the presentation itself. On the 1st of September 1989, ITV introduced a new generic logo and its first attempt at a national on-air identity. This was meant to be a turning point. For decades, ITV had existed as a patchwork of regional broadcasters that happened to share programmes. Now, it wanted to look like a single channel, modern, confident and cohesive. The branding was designed by English Markle Pocket with music by Lord David Dundas. This was serious talent, corporate identity specialists, a respected composer. ITV wasn't cutting corners, it was spending real money to look like a grown-up broadcaster. At the centre of it all was the new ITV logo. Heavy, block-like, unapologetically corporate. No whimsy, no warmth. It looked like it belonged on a headquarters wall rather than a family television set. That alone tells you something about the mindset behind it. This was ITV talking to regulators, advertisers and rivals as much as viewers. The logo became the spine of a whole system. There was a national ITV logo and then regional versions for each franchise. Each company's own symbol was shoehorned into the V of the logo as if to say, you still matter, but only inside our shape. And that compromise is important because it shows ITV already hedging its bets. This was supposed to be a national identity, but it still felt the need to reassure the regions that they hadn't been erased. The result was branding by negotiation rather than conviction. The ident itself followed a rigid formula. It opened with the franchise logo, then slid into a sequence of images including an Arctic tern, Big Ben, an athlete, dancers and a couple in period dress. Then it resolved into the regional version of the ITV logo. The intention was clear. ITV wanted to present itself as broad, inclusive and national, a channel that did everything for everyone. The problem is that none of those images actually said anything specific. They were stock ideas of Britain. They were safe and almost apologetic. You didn't learn anything about ITV from them. You were simply told politely that it existed. The music followed the same pattern. Dundas's score was smooth, restrained and professional. It sounded expensive. It sounded like it belonged on a corporate film shown at a conference. It didn't sound like television that wanted to excite or surprise. And this is where the cracks start to show. Branding works when it commits. This didn't. It tried to be everything and ended up meaning very little. ITV didn't help itself. Alongside the ident came a full presentation package. Regional clocks, trailers, a network font, brake bumpers. On paper, this was the most joined up ITV had ever looked. In reality, it exposed how little control the network actually had. Several franchises simply refused to adopt the look at all. Anglia, Channel, TVS, TSW, Ulster. They just said no. And that should have been the end of the conversation right there. A national identity that large parts of the network declined to use is not a national identity. It's a suggestion. In those regions, the logo still popped up in places ITV controlled directly, like network trailers, production end boards, the start of some shared programming. But the actual experience of watching ITV day to day remained stubbornly regional. Other companies technically adopted the look but immediately started bending it out of shape. Granada had used a modified version to fit its existing branding. Yorkshire changed the ident so their chevron dominated the screen. Central added its own fanfare and ident variations. These weren't minor tweaks, they were acts of resistance. Scottish Television barely bothered. It used the ident sparingly and dropped it by early 1990. STV understood something ITV's central planners didn't. Viewers in Scotland didn't want a watered-down national look. They wanted a strong Scottish one. Thames dropped the package entirely well before its franchise ended. Tyne Tees reverted to its own look but kept the music, which is perhaps the most damning verdict of all. The tune survived, but the visuals didn't. By the early 1990s, the 1989 look was already on life support. Region by region, it was quietly abandoned. LWT dropped it in 1992, HTV at the beginning of 1993. Border used it half-heartedly and then ditched it. Yorkshire clung on until 1994 and then walked away. Only Grampian stuck with it properly, right through until 1998. That loyalty says less about the strength of the identity and more about Grampian's position within the network. Smaller, less combative, more willing to accept a national template. So why did this fail? Well, the easiest answer is that ITV wasn't ready. But that lets the designers and decision makers off too lightly. The real problem is that the identity misunderstood what ITV actually was in 1989. ITV's strength had always been personality, strong regional brands, clear voices, a sense that programmes came from somewhere and someone. The generic look flattened all of that. It replaced character with polish. Instead of celebrating difference, it tried to smooth it away. The sliding images in the ident were a perfect example. They look nice, they move well, they mean nothing. They don't tell you why you should watch ITV instead of anyone else. They don't reflect the chaos, ambition, populism or grit that defined ITV at its best. This was ITV pretending to be neutral. And ITV has never been neutral. There's also a whiff of insecurity running through the whole thing. The logo is heavy because it wants authority. The music is restrained because it wants respect. The imagery is broad because it doesn't want to offend. This is a broadcaster trying to look confident while quietly panicking about its future. And that future was already closing in. The Broadcasting Act of 1990 would soon tear apart the old ITV structure. Franchises would be lost, companies would merge, the network would become more centralised by force rather than choice. In hindsight, the 1989 identity feels like an attempt to impose unity just before unity became unavoidable. It arrived too early, and with too little backbone. Ironically, the logo itself outlived the presentation. It stuck around on trailers and promotions long after the idents vanished. That suggests that the core symbol worked, but what failed was the will to stand behind it. Branding without authority is decoration, and what makes the 1989 look interesting is not that it succeeded, but that it exposed ITV's internal contradictions so clearly. A network that wanted to be one thing but refused to act like it. A channel desperate for coherence, yet unwilling to upset its own power base. Later ITV identities would fix this by force. One look, one voice, no opting out. By the time that happened, the regions had lost the leverage to resist. In that sense, the 1989 generic look is ITV's last polite attempt at unity. A compromise dressed up as a strategy. A national identity that asked nicely and accepted no for an answer. It isn't fondly remembered because it didn't earn affection. It didn't assert itself. It didn't trust its own instincts. And that's the most critical thing I can say about it. The 1989 ITV on-air look didn't fail because viewers rejected it. It failed because ITV didn't believe in it enough to insist it mattered. It wanted to look like one channel. It just wasn't prepared to act like one.
This has been the TV Live podcast with Rob Francis, a Red Telephone Box production.